you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the...
And says to him, did not God tell you to go? How he was going to get his army and who he was going to fight. They were fighting against King Jabin and the general of his army by the name of Sisera in chapter 4 and verse 2. It's after Ehud has died. The Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, the king of the Canaanites. And Jabin and Sisera are the two. I think one of the things we understand when we look at the judges and we look at Deborah and Barak is that when God is going to lead the nation, when God is going to save the people, He uses people. You know, it's really been that way throughout history. Whatever mankind can do, God allows us to do. When the Canaanites were oppressing the people and they're seeking deliverance, God doesn't just wipe out the Canaanites. Rather, He raises up a judge and a general to lead the nation to fight the battle, to do what it can. Now, ultimately, God is the one who gives that battle into their hand. We saw that last week with Jericho. I give you the city. But God always uses people. In Acts chapter 10, when Cornelius, who was a man who feared God and prayed daily, gave alms to the poor, that taught his family, that was devout in his submission to God. Here was a man who was doing a lot of good things, a lot of things right. And he's praying to God that he might find the way of salvation. And God says, your supplication has been heard. Right? The angel comes to him and says, we've heard what you're asking. You're asking for salvation. You're asking for this wisdom. Your supplication has been heard. God has listened to it, and He's now going to answer it. And then what does He tell him to do? Yeah. The angel doesn't say, Cornelius, what you need to do is believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God. And that believing that you're going to turn away from a life of sin and all of those wrong things that you've done and turn toward the righteousness that comes from God, confess Him before men and be baptized for the remission of your sins. The angel doesn't say that. I mean, those are words that the angel is able to speak. And certainly the angel, coming as a messenger from God, knows the plan of salvation. But where people can be used to accomplish the will of God, God uses people. Send to Peter. Peter will come back and he will tell you words whereby you must be saved. And the same is true today. We cannot expect messengers from heaven to take over the job of evangelism. We can't rely upon some heavenly beings coming down and telling people what to do to be saved, or God whispering into the hearts and the minds of people. I know there's people out there who say, God spoke to me. God said this to me. God, in my ear, in my heart, I heard these words. People may say those things, but we know that's not true. Paul would say, though we or an angel from heaven tell you any other gospel, let him be accursed. God does not whisper into people's ears. He does not just put the plan of salvation upon people's hearts. God said, we are the ones that He relies on. We are the Deborahs and the Baraks and the Gideons and the Shamgars of God's work today. And so we go back, we look at the judges, and we see that God uses people. We also see the lesson here, as we see here in verse 7. It says, I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you at the river of Kishon. and his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand. Deborah is asking Barak, do you not understand what God is saying to you? God is saying, if you will go, he will give you the victory. God always gives the victory. Even when we think that we have earned it, and we've worked really hard for it, God is the one who really gives us victory. In every walk of life, you say, well, look at me. I'm a CEO of a company, or I'm high up. I own my own business. I went to college. I worked hard. I got good grades. I got my degree. I worked my way up in the company, and now I sit where I sit because of hard work and dedication and all of these things. And we're very susceptible to the thought that I am where I am because of what I have done. But in reality, we are who we are, and we are where we are because of who He is. Yes, you've worked hard. There's no doubt. You worked hard. Who gave you the ability to work like that? You studied. You studied like it was nobody's business. Who gave you the ability to study and to learn, to remember, to grow? Who gave you the ability to turn experience or doing the work into an experience that would allow you to grow and better yourself? Who gave you that ability? If for no other reason we look at God's supplementary blessings, who gave you a home to go home to each night and study those books? Who gave you the daily bread, the necessary food to keep your body filled with energy to be able to study and do those things? Who gave you the ability to sleep at night in peaceful rest so that in the morning you could get up and go to work and climb that ladder? You see, God is giving us the victory all along. What He does is He uses our accomplishments and our abilities to bring about His desired result. And He is in control of all things. If we look at Daniel, we don't understand anything about the book of Daniel. We understand God is in control. And each time Nebuchadnezzar thought he was in control, God showed you not. Nebuchadnezzar had the dream, I'm the great king, but I don't even remember what I dreamed. I just remembered it troubled me. But God knew. God gave the interpretation of it, not just the interpretation. He told him what it was, reminded him of the dream, and then gave him the interpretation. In Daniel chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refused to bow. The king, well, I'm going to kill you. The king is in control, right? No, God is in control. And those three Jews looked out from the fiery furnace. They knew God was in control. When they saw the king's men dying because of the heat escaping the door of the furnace, they knew God was in control. God gives victory. He gave Jericho, and He's promising here to Deborah and Barak, if you will do what I'm asking you to do, is go gather that army, then I will deliver Jabin's army and Sisera into your hands. I give them to you. I always like Gideon's account when we get over to chapter 6 and 7 and 8. And Gideon, God says, Gideon, you've got too many men. Your army is too big. What? How is an army too big? It would just seem to me that if an army is too big, that means they win with greater ease. If an army is too big, they experience fewer casualties. If an army is too big, maybe the enemy looks at them across the battlefield and goes home. But He said, your army's too big, lest you find victory and you think, look what I've done. And you forget that it was God who gave the victory. See, God gives victory. He always gives the victory. And so we trust in that. Notice in verse 8, Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go. Some have talked about, here's the woman, and this by the way, the whole account of Deborah and Barak turns the patriarchal principles. A patriarchal society turns it on its head because you have the woman in the leadership role encouraging the man in the subordinate role to take the lead, to take the challenge, and so forth. And God is going to bless them. And Barak, people say, well, look, Barak, he's just a wishy-washy, mamby-pamby type man. He's not willing to do it on his own. He's not willing to trust in God. But I don't see it necessarily that Barak's saying, look, I'll go if you go, but if you refuse to go, I'm not going. It's not so much that Barak is afraid to face the army without Deborah, or that he's afraid to do it on his own. I think a lot of it has to do with who she is. She is the judge and the prophetess of who? Of God, right? She speaks for God. She's God's mouthpiece at that moment. And if you're going to go into battle, who's the one person you want with you in battle? God. So it's not that he doesn't trust, but it's as if he's saying, yes, I trust what you're saying, but I want God near me the whole time. And the personification at that time of God on earth was Deborah. She was his prophet. She was his judge. She was the one that delivered the message. I'll go if you go with me. I will keep God near to me. And that's how we have to be in our lives. We think about all the things we have to accomplish in a given day or a given week, or maybe a project at the end of the month, and maybe we're marching into the military and we're going to face an enemy, or maybe we're marching into work and we've got to accomplish things. We go trusting God. We trust that God will bring about His will. We trust that God's will be done. We praise and we glorify Him. And even though we trust Him, it doesn't mean we say, okay, I trust God, and we leave our Bible and our faith at home when we walk out. But we trust Him and we keep Him near, right? We continually keep Him near. And so we're not leaving behind God when we go into the battlefield. We trust Him to give us the victory, but we keep Him near, as Barak says here, if you will go with me, then I will go. When we read about Deborah and Barak, I think one of the most interesting things is that victory comes from unexpected places. How often do we have in our mind a certain pattern or certain way things are going to go? This is my plan. I've worked it all out. Here's how things are going to work. And then maybe it works out in the end, but we didn't get to the end by the plan that we had worked. Has that ever happened to you? That things worked out okay, they just didn't work the way I thought they would. And that's fine. We face many times in our lives where things are going to work out, but maybe not work out the way we would think that they would work out, because God is in control. There's one of those motivational signs, or sayings that sometimes you see that says, you want to make God laugh? Tell Him your plans. Now, the sentiment I think that some people have behind that is just let go and let God, or, God expects us to have plans. James 4 says, it's not that you shouldn't have a plan to go into the city and buy and sell and get gain, but he says, you should say, if the Lord wills, we will follow this plan. But we have to be amenable to God working in our lives outside of the plan that we have for Him. It's kind of funny to say that we have a plan for God, but I think we do a lot of times. Here's what we plan to do, and we want to keep God in that plan. And I'll do this, and then God will do these things, and this will happen, and then God will do these, and I'll do these. We have it worked out, but God doesn't work by our plan. We have to have a plan, but God may do something else. What do you suppose Barak was intending when he decided to go into battle? Well, he thought that God would give him the great victory, that he would come back the great war hero. He trusted God enough to go. He's taking the spokesperson of God with him so that God is kept near. But in verse 9, She tells him what? He says, you're going to go, and I'm going to go with you. Nevertheless, the Lord is going to sell Victor or Sisera into the hand of a woman. Unexpected places. Things don't always go the way we plan, but God will still bring what is best for us. Now, that's important too, because sometimes what we think is best for us isn't what's best for us, right? And we have to be willing to accept what God gives to us, willing to accept changes in our plans, and willing to accept His will, even if it's not what we thought was best, or even if it's not something we wanted. She says to Barak, I'm going to give the victory, or the victory, God's going to give the victory to a woman. Now, we might at first expect that to be who? I think the natural inclination would be think that's Deborah. She is the spokesperson of God. She is the prophetess. She is the one who's leading. She's the one that's encouraging Barak to go. And so I'll go with you, but understand God is going to give the victory over Sisera, not Jabin. Who was Jabin? Jabin was the king. Normally he had victories over the king, but this time it was Sisera, the general, who was the general of the king's army. But it's very specific. Sisera will be delivered into the hand of a woman. And we find out that's who. Verse 21. Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. Then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. And so he died. Now, yes, the victory was given to Deborah, and ultimately, she sings the great song of victory here in chapter 5, but don't overlook the detail that the woman who actually overcame Sisera wasn't Deborah, but Jael. Victory comes in unexpected ways, and God will bring about His victory however He intends to do so. And then ultimately, when we look at the account, we have to do what we can do. And that goes back to that first lesson, that God uses people, and the corollary to that is He uses me. He uses me ultimately to accomplish His great will. So that's who we need to be, a people willing to be used by God in whatever capacity God needs us to bring about His will, whether that's evangelism, or that's encouragement, or that's benevolence, to accomplish His mission. He has given it to us to do, so we must do what we can do. And if we do everything that we can do, then whatever shortcomings or failures we might have, God makes up on the other side. That's grace. Another great lesson that I see in the account of Deborah and Barak comes in chapter 5. After they've gained the victory, what do? Yeah, they start praising God. Gideon, he was worried about Gideon because if you won the victory with your army the way it was intact, you might forget about me. There's a lot of reasons why we might forget about God. In the midst of our prosperity, we might forget about God. When we have become successful, like we described earlier, we chalk it up to ourselves, and sometimes we forget about God. We may be with a group of people, and we're so excited about the group and the cohesion of the group and what the group has done that we forget about God's role in the victory. That's what I like about the example of Deborah and Barak is they're coming home from victory, they start praising God. And it's the song of Deborah and Barak. Then sang Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, on that day, that the leaders took the lead in Israel, and that the people offered themselves willingly. Bless the Lord. Hear, O kings. Give ear, O princes, to the Lord. I will sing. I will make melody to the Lord, the God of Israel. Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the region of Edom, the earth trembled, the heavens dropped. Yes, the clouds dropped water. The mountains quaked before the Lord, even Sinai before the Lord, the God of Israel. And so they start to praise God for all that He has done. He even says in verse 6, in the days of Shamgar, the son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were abandoned. Who's Shamgar? Yeah, he's one of the judges. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, right? Get him, baby? Okay, I got to sing the song in my head sometime. So here's Shamgar. He's one of the judges. He's one of the early judges. And she's saying from the time of Shamgar to the time of Jael. Why Jael? Why not Deborah? Why does she mention Jael? Okay, we might say credit to whom credit is due. She is the one through whom God worked. But also think about this. When they actually fought the battle, it says that every one of the Canaanites were killed except what? Except Sisera, except that one. And so he fled, and he is running. It's as if the victory is not complete until what? Until he is dead. And who ultimately brought that about? Jael. So the idea is from the end of the time of Shamgar, whenever the nation fell into dismay and they were being oppressed by the Canaanites, until the moment in which victory was total. That's when Jael drove the peg into his temple. That time, it says that they were abandoned, that they were, the highways were abandoned. Travelers kept to the byways. People were afraid in the land of Israel. But now God has given victory. Fear doesn't have to be here anymore. They will have ultimate victory. So we praise God for what He has given to us. It continues, it talks about how the villagers ceased in Israel in verse 7. They ceased to be until I arose. I, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. When new gods were chosen, then war was in the gates. When it was shield or spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel. My heart goes out to the commanders of Israel who offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless the Lord. And we see another important lesson in verse 9. We saw it already in verse 2. God has a plan, but notice, they offered themselves how? The ESV says willingly. They gave themselves willingly. We often hear this sentiment when we're talking about giving to the Lord's cause, right? Talk about our contribution. The Lord loves what? A cheerful giver. That's right. Or we must give willingly, not grudgingly, right? Not out of necessity. So we understand it, or we hear it a lot when it comes to giving our contribution to the Lord's church, that we give willingly. But in 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 5, we find out that they were willing to give willingly, or that they wanted to give of themselves. Why? Because they gave of themselves first to the Lord. They gave themselves first to God. When we give ourselves first to God, that means that I give my physical life, I give my spiritual life, my emotional life, my material life. I give everything to God. It becomes His, and I put it in His control. Therefore, when God asks, give willingly, give cheerfully, it's easy to do because I've already willingly given myself. I like in John 10 when Jesus is talking about his own sacrifice. And he says, no one takes my life from me. I'm not taking it away from me. But I lay down my life willingly. It's the same word that's used here. I give it willingly. I'm ready to give for mankind. And if he is willing to give for us and our benefit, how much more should we be willing to give to him for all of his blessings toward us? And so they gave willingly. They were willing to put their lives on the line so that God's victory could be met. As we progress further in the song, verse 12, awake, awake, Deborah. Awake, awake, break out in song. Arise, Barak, lead your captives, O son of Abinoam. Then down marched the remnant of the noble. The people of the Lord marched down from me against the mighty. From Ephraim, their roots, they marched down into the valley, following you, Benjamin, with your kinsmen. From Maker marched down the commanders, and from Zebulun and those who bear the lieutenant's staff. The princes of Issachar came with Deborah, the Issachar faithful to Barak. Into the valley they rushed at his heels. Among the clans of Reuben there were great searchings of heart. So we have all of these tribes of Israel that are mentioned and how they quickly got in line to go into the battle. The original was that there were going to be 10,000 from Naphtali and Zebulun, but here we are mentioned Benjamin and Issachar also are responding to the call. But it says that Reuben had this great searching of heart. He's looking inside. He's debating whether or not to go into battle. And then she says, why did you sit among the sheepfolds to hear the whistling for the flocks? Among the clans of Reuben there were great searchings of heart. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan. And Dan, why did he stay with the ships? Asher sat still in the coast of the sea, staying by his landings. But Zebulun is a people who risk their lives to the death. Naphtali too, on the heights of the field. Some of them didn't go. Some didn't respond. Simple fact is when good works are being done for God, not everyone joins in. Now you would think, oh, well, it's a good work. It's going to bring glory to God. It's going to boost the church. It's going to spread the borders of the kingdom. This is a great work. Why did not everyone get involved? Why do some people sit back and do nothing? What's Reuben doing? They're doing some soul searching, right? You know, there's some people who look at the work of the Lord and they start doing this soul searching and they're wondering, is this what God wants me to do? Is this where God is leading me? And they do so much soul searching that by the time they've come to a conclusion, it's done. That's kind of what happened here. Reuben is straight. I mean, they're searching their hearts. They want to make sure this is the right move. They don't want to go out ahead of God. And so while they're searching, God's people are doing the great work and they gain the victory. And they're coming back and Reuben's still over here wrestling. I don't want to minimize how we feel when we're doing that soul searching. And certainly with anything, we should look at it and make sure that it is a work of God and that it is going to bring glory to His name. But we can't soul search so much that we don't put our hand to the plow. What about some of the others? Is it Asher that's at the shipyards? What's going on at the harbor? Ships are coming in and they're going out, and they're bringing cargo, right? The harbor was a place of commerce, a place of trade. What's Asher doing there? Well, they're making a living. This is, we're seeing the ships come in, we're taking the cargo off, we're selling it, we're putting cargo on to go to other places. We're working. Is it possible today for people to work so much at making a living that they don't engage in the work of God? Huh? Yes, sir. Yeah. That's what they're doing. They're out making their money, and as a result, they didn't go into the battle. They didn't go to the good work which God had done. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan. There's an old saying that says, all that it takes for evil to succeed is for good men to what? Do nothing. We look at the world and we say, well, what was it? In World War II, they came after the Jews. But I wasn't a Jew, so it didn't bother me. And then they came after the black man, but I wasn't a black man, so it didn't bother me. It didn't bother me until they did what? They came after me. And the idea of that sentiment is we need to step in when injustice is seen, whether it's to someone like me or someone completely different from me, even if it's someone who believes something different than me. When there's injustice in the world, we need to step in and stand up for the little guy, as it were. Gilead, which was in the region of Gad was on the other side of the river. Canaanites weren't bothering people on the other side of the river. In their mind, they had no dog in this hunt or dog in this fight. Why should we come to your rescue? They're not coming after us. Are there some people who look at the work of God or the good things that God are happening in God's house, and they think, well, it doesn't really affect me that much, and so I think I'll stay home? Is that possible? Yeah. And then, who's the other one? Dan's with the ships as well, with Asher. I would think that there's an application to be made too about comfort. Where we're most comfortable, we like to be there. There's that easy chair at home. After a hard day's work, you want to come home for a little while and just sit in the easy chair, right? Be at home. That's where it's comfortable. I don't want to have to get out and do. Sometimes the work of the Lord goes unfinished because there are too many people that are just comfortable with where they are and they don't want to put forth the effort of doing the work of the Lord. I'll have to stay up later, or I may have to miss dinner or miss a TV show, or I might have to not spend as much time tying flies for my fly fishing hobby, or whatever the deal is. And there's nothing wrong with watching TV. There's nothing wrong with tying flies. There's nothing wrong with eating dinner. I'm not saying that it's wrong to do those things. But sometimes the work of the Lord takes us out of where we're comfortable. And that may mean that we, if something needs to be done, that my fly tying, my tie is flying. My fly tying waits a little longer. that I put it off a little while. That dinner maybe waits and I reheat it when it comes back. You see, if we just stick with what is most comfortable to us, then the work of the Lord is not going to get done. Because the work of the Lord takes energy, it takes time, it takes resources, it takes commitment. You just look at those four things, and those are things that a lot of times we don't want to give up. And so we stay on the other side of the Jordan. We stay home. So what do? We prepare for that. We know that that happens. There's an 80-20 rule that people talk about in the business world, talk about it even in the church, that 80% of the work gets done by 20% of the people. What's that saying? It's saying that not everyone will put their hand to the plow. Not everyone is going to get involved in the work. We understand that. So we encourage, we don't accept that you're not going to work. We encourage you, maybe if not in this project or this work, that you'll get involved in the next one, or this one over here that's going on at the same time. We're still trying to find a place for you to get plugged in. That's the whole point of our ministry fair. What are you doing here? Is we're trying to find a place for you to get involved. But just because the slot is open, we know that doesn't mean that you're going to jump in. You might pull a Reuben or a Gad or a Dan or an Asher. We know that. But we hope and pray that you'll eventually become the Zebulun or the Naphtali, that you'll eventually be the one to step in and take a role. Because there's always a need for you. For each one of us, there's a need for us. And so we understand that some are not going to answer the call, but we still need to have the call that is put out there. When the kings came, they fought the kings of Canaan in verse 19 at Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo. What was Megiddo? We'll finish with this point. Megiddo was one of the hills. In fact, it was the hill where Solomon eventually is going to keep his chariots and his horses for battle. It was a stronghold in the nation of Israel in the land of Palestine. And it flowed into the valley of Kishon. That's where this battle takes place. It's also known as the Valley of Esdraelon. Now, why do I mention all of this? In the book of Revelation, it talks about Armageddon. Literally in the Aramaic, Armageddon, the hill of Megiddo. And people are up in arms about, well, Armageddon's coming. Armageddon, we can't find peace in the Middle East, and so those are signs of the ends of times, and all these bad things. Armageddon. When in reality, what Revelation is talking about is a place of judgment. Because Deborah and Barak fight against God's enemies and win victory at Megiddo. There are, I believe, 8 total battles in the Old Testament that take place in this valley at the foot of Megiddo. And each time there's a distinctive victory for God. And so when we get over to the book of Revelation and it's talking about the kingdom that has come now, and it says that Armageddon, it's saying that there is a distinct victory for God that is coming. Ultimately, that is going to be when we're in heaven. But it's not that there's going to be some atomic massacre in the Middle East. It's actually talking about how we in the kingdom have great victory by the power of God. It is the judgment place, the deciding place for God and His people. All right, well, I appreciate your attention. We'll pick up next week on our next lesson, but we didn't go through all of the judges, obviously. We're missing, we have to skip a lot when we're going through these things, but I do appreciate we didn't get into last week Joshua 24:15. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, but I appreciate Joe and Barbara putting that on the sign out here, as that was part of the idea. We will serve the Lord no matter what. So anyway, appreciate your attention, and y'all have a good week.
Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood